Morning, readers, and welcome back to Reads with Room B. Today we'll be doing Chapter 2 of Alice in Wonderland, The Pool of Tears. Curiouser and curiouser, Alice cried. She was so much surprised that for the moment she quite forgot how to speak good English. I'm now opening out like the largest telescope that ever was. Goodbye, feet. For when she looked down at her feet, they seemed to be almost out of sight. They were getting so far off. Oh, my poor little feet. I wonder who will put on your shoes and stockings for you now, dears. I'm sure I shan't be able. I shall be a great deal too far off, and to trouble myself about you. You must manage the best way you can. But I must be kind to them, thought Alice, or perhaps they won't walk the way I want them to. Let me see. I'll give them a new pair of boots every Christmas. And she went on, planning to herself how she would manage it. They must go by carrier, she thought, and how funny it will seem, sending presents to one's own feet. And how odd the directions will look. Alice's right foot, Esquire, hearth rug, near the fender, with Alice's love. Oh dear, what nonsense I'm talking. Just at this moment her head struck against the roof of the hall. In fact, she was now rather more than 9 feet high, and she at once took up the little golden key and hurried off to the garden door. Poor Alice! It was as much as she could do, lying down on one side, to look through into the garden with one eye. But to get through was more hopeless than ever. She sat down and began to cry. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, said Alice. A great girl like you. She might well say this. To go on crying that way. Stop that this moment, I tell you. But she went on all the same, shedding gallons of tears, until there was a large pool all around her, about 4 inches deep, and reaching halfway down the hall. After a time, she heard a little pattering of feet in the distance, and she hastily dried her eyes to see what was coming. It was the White Rabbit, returning, splendidly dressed, with a pair of white kid gloves in one hand and a large fan in the other. He came trotting along in a great hurry, muttering to himself as he came, "Oh, the Duchess, the Duchess! Oh, won't she be savage if I keep her waiting?" Alice felt so desperate that she was ready to ask help of anyone. So, when the rabbit came near her, she began in a low, timid voice, "If you please, sir." The rabbit, startled violently, dropped the white kid gloves and the fan, and scurried away into the darkness as hard as he could go. Alice took up the fan and gloves, and, as the hall was very hot, she kept fanning herself all the time she went on talking. Dear, dear, how queer everything is today. And yesterday things went on just as usual. I wonder if I've been changed in the night. Let me think. Was I the same when I got up this morning? I almost think I can remember feeling a little different. But if I am not the same, the next question is, who in the world am I? That's the great puzzle. And she began thinking over all the children she knew and that were the same age as herself, so she could see if she had been changed for any of them. I'm sure I'm not Ada, she said, for her hair goes in such long ringlets, and mine doesn't go in ringlets at all. I'm sure I can't be Mabel, for I know all sorts of things, and she knows such a very little. Besides, she's she, and I'm I. Oh dear, how puzzling it all is. I'll try if I know all the things I'll try if I know all the things I used to know. Let me see. 4 times 5 is 12, and 4 times 6 is 13, and 4 times 7 is, oh dear, I shall never get to 20 at that rate. However, the multiplication table doesn't signify. Let's try geography. London is the capital of Paris. Paris is the capital of Rome. And Rome... No! That's all wrong, I'm certain. I must have been changed for Mabel. I'll try and say, how doth the little... She crossed her hands on her lap as if she were saying her lessons, and began to repeat. But her voice sounded hoarse and strange, and the words did not come out as they used to do. How doth the little crocodile improve his shining tail, and pour the waters of the Nile on every golden scale? How cheerfully he seems to grin, how neatly spreads his claws, and welcomes little fishes in, with gently smiling jaws. I'm sure those are not the right words, said poor Alice, and her eyes filled with tears again as she went on. I must be Mabel after all, and I shall have to go and live in that poky little house, and have next to no toys to play with, and, oh, ever so many lessons to learn. No, I've made my mind up about it. If I'm Mabel, I'll stay down here. It'll be no use their putting their heads down and saying, come on, come up again, dear. I shall only look up and say, then who am I then? Tell me that first, and then if I like being that person, I shall come up. If not, I shall stay down here until I'm somebody else. But, oh dear, cried Alice, with a sudden burst of tears. I do wish they would put their heads down. I'm so very tired of being all alone down here. As she said this, she looked down at her hands, and was surprised to see that she had put one of the rabbit's little white kid gloves on while she was talking. How could I have done that? She thought. I must be growing small again. She got up and went to the table to measure herself by it, and found that, as near as she could guess, she was about 2 feet high, and was going on shrinking rapidly. She soon found that the cause of this was the fan that she was holding. She dropped it hastily, just in time to save herself from shrinking away altogether. That was a narrow escape, said Alice, a good deal frightened by the sudden change, but very glad to find herself still in existence. And now for the garden. And she ran with all speed back to the little door. But alas, the little door was shut again, and the little golden key was lying on the glass table as before. And things are worse than ever, thought the poor child, for I was never so small as this before, never. And I declare it's too bad that it is. And as she said these words, her foot slipped, and in another moment, splash! She was up to her chin in salt water. Her first idea was that she had somehow fallen into the sea. In that case, I can go back by railway, she said to herself. Alice had been to the seaside once in her life, and had come to the general conclusion that wherever you go on the English coast, you can find a number of bathing machines in the sea, and some children digging in the sand with wooden spades, and then a row of lodging houses, and behind them a railway station. However, she soon made out that she was in the pool of tears which she had wept when she was 9 feet high. I wish I hadn't cried so much, said Alice, as she swam about, trying to find her way out. I shall be punished for it now, I suppose, by drowning in my own tears. That will be a queer thing, to be sure. However, everything is queer today. And I'm going to stop there because the noise in my house is really bad. So, this is Chapter 2, Part 1. Keep reading.